Bom, boa tarde a todos. Muito obrigado por estarem aqui conosco nesse
Good
dia
afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. We will be launching the White Book and also creating an important landmark considering the IVD sector. This is a multiple hands teamwork in order to take to the patient the access to an early diagnosis that will allow efficient therapies. Together with us today, we have specialists in healthcare from the world, so it's an honor to start this webinar. I would like to have Fabio Arcuri, the president of the Brazilian Chamber of the Laboratory Diagnostics. Thank you, Carlos. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope everyone is well and healthy. And I would like to thank everyone for being here with us today to share these moments that are going to be very interesting. This is a very important year for CBDL. We will celebrate our 30th anniversary in October. It's been a long journey, and today it allows us to be here in this great event with awesome proposals and an important maturity. It's also a sad moment because throughout this journey, we have lost Dalia Gutenberg, one of our colleagues. She was a victim of COVID-19, and Dalia, together with our members, they were very, very important for us to the evolution of regulation in Brazil together with Anvisa. But wherever she is, I hope that she is well, and we will try to keep healthy here. And I am sure we will have an excellent event, and I'm looking forward to it. So moving on, Carlos, the floor is yours. Okay, so we will start now. We have an important agenda for the industry, and I hope it is very fruitful for everyone. We have first a presentation of the work that has been done for the Laboratory Diagnostics White Book. The first video is from Patricia Morone, our economist, to give you an overview of the White Book. And then we will move on to a specific presentation of the highlights of the book, just to give you a taste so that you really dive into the book. The book is already available on the CBDL website, cbdl.org.br, and it can be downloaded both in Portuguese and in English. This transmission is also available in 3 languages, Portuguese, English, and Spanish. If you look at the bottom of your screen in Zoom, you are able to choose your preferred language. I would also ask everyone to keep your cameras and microphones muted. And you can write your questions on the chat box and in the Q&A session. It's very important to know your entity, your name, and country that you're speaking from. So thank you very much, and we will have the first video right now.
Foi com muita satisfação que participamos da equipe de coordenação técnica do Livro Branco do Diagnóstico Laboratorial. O documento procurou mostrar uma visão retrospectiva, atual e prospectiva das ações da entidade ao longo dos anos de 2019 e 2020 e projetada para 2021 e 2022. No que se refere à parte retrospectiva, foram mostradas as ações da entidade em 2019 e 2020, com ênfase nas ações da CBDL em parceria com outras entidades privadas, o Ministério da Saúde e a Anvisa, no contexto da Covid-19, e todo um esforço coordenado que foi feito por essas entidades e instituições para garantir que a população brasileira tivesse acesso a testes de diagnóstico COVID de boa qualidade. Em outro capítulo, mostramos a participação da CBDL no contexto da cadeia produtiva da saúde e como ela interage com os atores e players dessa cadeia de maneira a fortalecer a entidade no contexto da saúde e garantir que preencha e cumpra o seu papel em termos de trazer saúde para a população, sendo que o paciente está no centro dessa cadeia. Nesse sentido, toda essa atuação da entidade diante desses stakeholders visa manter a entidade bastante alinhada com a evolução tecnológica e, ao mesmo tempo, ela objetiva fazer com que as ações políticas da entidade sejam levadas adiante por meio do entendimento, do diálogo e de decisões de comum acordo com os parceiros. Um outro capítulo retrata as aflições das empresas do setor na atualidade no que se refere à sustentabilidade do setor, que já vem sido muito afetada pela falta de atualização das tabelas de reembolso dos agentes pagadores público e privado, e fato que foi agravado recentemente com a forte desvalorização do real perante o dólar. O último capítulo, que traz uma visão mais prospectiva da entidade, ele traz 21 propostas distribuídas entre as 4 fases do ciclo do diagnóstico laboratorial, que também é o ciclo do dispositivo médico como um todo. Portanto, são apresentadas algumas propostas relacionadas à primeira etapa do ciclo, que se refere à pesquisa, desenvolvimento e inovação. Outras propostas relacionadas à questão da melhoria do ambiente regulatório do setor, questões e propostas relacionadas ao acesso da população a diagnósticos cada vez mais modernos e mais um grupo de propostas relacionadas à questão de monitoramento e gestão do diagnóstico laboratorial já na fase de quando ele já foi incorporado ao sistema. Todo esse esforço foi desempenhado ao longo do período de 8 meses, com reuniões semanais com a equipe e quinzenais com a diretoria da entidade e presidência, Fábio Arcuri, que participaram ativamente de toda essa construção, opinando, fazendo correções e retificações para que ele refletisse de fato as aspirações dos atores e das empresas do setor. Não deixo de notar e lamentar o falecimento da nossa querida Dália, que nos deixou esse ano e que era uma pessoa excepcional. Além de tudo, fazia parte de todo o patrimônio imaterial desse setor. Esperamos que todo esse trabalho conjunto seja apreciado por aqueles que tiverem acesso ao documento e participem da cadeia de saúde. Muito obrigada.
Agora teremos um segundo vídeo.
Okay, so moving on, we have a second.
Bom, então vamos ao livro branco do diagnóstico laboratorial e as propostas de sustentabilidade setorial. Mas antes de falarmos das propostas, vamos falar um pouco da CBDL, né? Então a missão da CBDL é apoiar, defender, fortalecer as empresas no setor IVD do Brasil. Além disso, a gente visa contribuir à sustentabilidade do setor, que é justamente a razão principal que nos encontramos aqui hoje, e promover o diagnóstico para a vida. A CBDL conta hoje com 54 empresas. Então, a CBDL teve um faturamento de 5,5 bilhões de reais no ano de 2020. E entre os nossos associados, temos fabricantes locais, distribuidores, né, e empresas que contemplam todas essas atividades de importação, de fabricação e de distribuição. Nesse sentido, visando entender as questões de mercado e de seu equilíbrio financeiro, nós propusemos uma pesquisa entre os associados. E esta pesquisa foi então dirigida aos associados, teve uma participação de 70% do nosso grupo. Esse grupo de 70% tem uma representatividade de aproximadamente 4.000 funcionários. Em nosso mercado, cerca de 50% dos produtos são importados, o que significa que a gente sofre uma pressão de variação cambial muito grande. Dentre esses produtos, ou dentro dessas linhas de produto, a gente observa que os reagentes têm uma representatividade quase de 90% no total comercializado pela CBDL. Quando a gente olha o Brasil dentro do contexto mundial, a gente vê que existe um espaço muito grande para crescimento, né? Se a gente compara com o Reino Unido, por exemplo, os nossos gastos per capita são cerca de 35% inferiores aos do país que me referi. Isso significa uma oportunidade muito grande de crescimento, até porque a gente nota que a representatividade do Brasil no mercado mundial é baixa, 3,5% apenas. Quando a gente olha o que aconteceu em 2020, né, a gente observa, ou quando a gente olha para trás, a gente observa que de 2014 a 2019, por conta dessas pressões, por conta das pressões cambiais, porque, claro, grande parte do produto comercializado é importado, a gente nota que houve uma perda de cerca de 20% da margem de lucro dos nossos associados nesse período citado. Então, o que a gente percebeu ao longo de 2020 foi que, muito embora muitas empresas tinham produtos relacionados e relativos à Covid, portanto tiveram um aumento nas suas vendas, outras empresas não tiveram a mesma sorte, ou ainda as empresas que tinham produtos para Covid não necessariamente conseguiram compensar a perda por conta da queda da atividade do mercado como um todo, que afetou o mercado da saúde, como, por exemplo, cancelamento de check-ups, exames de rotina, etc. Né? Então, essa redução de venda, atrelada à variação cambial, por exemplo, né, causou uma insuficiência de caixa em algumas empresas. Então, algumas empresas tiveram dificuldades e problemas de equilíbrio financeiro. Estamos falando aí de aproximadamente 13 pontos percentuais de 2019 a 2020. Como resultado principal da pesquisa, eu queria aqui, dentre os vários itens, porque é claro que o nosso objetivo é convidá-los a lerem o livro, né? E verem a riqueza de material que está lá e que a gente espera que vocês aproveitem bastante. Mas, de fato, variação cambial foi um dos principais, se não o principal item apontado pelos nossos associados. Aí a outra questão importante é que, atualmente, a incorporação de novas tecnologias mais eficazes, mais robustas e precisas, elas pressionam ainda mais o custo das empresas, porque existe um investimento muito grande dos fornecedores junto aos clientes para justamente apoiá-los nessa incorporação de tecnologia. Com isso, o que a gente pôde entender com todo esse aprendizado, primeiro que a saúde suplementar no mercado nacional, no mercado brasileiro, ela apresenta pontos importantes que merecem uma análise e uma discussão melhor. A nossa dependência por produtos importados também afeta muito o equilíbrio financeiro, porque estamos sempre dependentes das questões macroeconômicas do país. Por isso, preocupados com isso, a gente apresenta propostas de encaminhamento para a melhoria da sustentabilidade do setor IVD. Então eu queria passar a palavra agora para o Carlos Gouveia. Bom evento para todos. Obrigado.
E agora eu gostaria de falar um pouco sobre a estratégia de alianças que a CBDL adotou ao longo desses últimos anos. Se vocês forem avaliar, todos os eventos nos quais nós participamos, que foram muitos, na verdade tinham esse objetivo de criar grandes relações duradouras e de confiança. E por quê? Durante 2019 e 2020, isso é um grande exemplo. Porque, na verdade, os objetivos da cadeia de valor é o de exatamente otimizar as atividades gerir e coordenar a cadeia como um todo, do início ao fim, buscar, através de redes competitivas e colaborativas, o menor custo possível, mas tentando obter os melhores resultados para todos aqueles que estão dela participando. E estabelecer processos e infraestruturas de tecnologia da informação que permitam, sim, dar um suporte a essas relações que estão sendo estabelecidas ao longo da cadeia. Essa gestão do fluxo de conhecimento, compartilhamento das informações, tudo isso acaba sendo fundamental para que a gente possa combater eventuais problemas. A construção de uma relação de confiança entre os parceiros, ela de fato contribui para a redução dos custos de controle e de supervisão, ou seja, no final o custo total da transação acaba sendo muito menor, principalmente se você ainda analisar que existe um caráter político nessas relações. Então, como resultado, nós buscamos que a cadeia de valor seja exatamente bem representada por um fluxo de informação desobstruído, sem grandes barreiras, para que se crie de forma adequada um valor para todos aqueles membros, o CBDL e todos os seus parceiros, de forma sincronizada e em sintonia, formando assim um grande resultado para quem? Para o paciente ao final. Dentro dessa relação construída pela CBDL, junto com todos vocês, parceiros ao longo dos anos, o que nós temos buscado, sim, é o fortalecimento de uma relação longa e duradoura e que traga esse benefício para o próprio paciente. E aí contando com todos os diferentes elos e atores dessa nossa relação. Agradeço a todos e convido agora a Liliana Pérez para falar sobre as propostas para o fortalecimento dos ciclos de vida da área de diagnóstico in vitro. Muito obrigado.
Olá! O livro branco é um convite para a sustentabilidade do nosso setor. E para que isso aconteça, sugerimos algumas propostas que estão embasadas nos 4 grandes pilares do ciclo de vida do diagnóstico in vitro. São eles: a inovação, a regulação, o acesso e o monitoramento e gestão. Sabemos que o sucesso é um esporte coletivo, então eu quero fazer um convite para vocês a participarem dessa construção e desse programa, né, que nós vamos fazer na sequência do lançamento. A ideia é a gente formar grupos de trabalho ligados a cada pilar para que nós atuemos nas propostas que estão sugeridas. Qual o nosso objetivo com isso? Cumprir a nossa missão, que é promover o diagnóstico para a vida. Esse é o nosso propósito. Então eu vou passar rapidamente pelos 4 pilares e falar um pouco das propostas. O primeiro pilar, que é o pilar da inovação, foi um pilar que foi impulsionado pela Covid. A Covid nos ajudou bastante. Algumas ações que há muitos anos a gente já tinha em planejamento e que hoje se veem mais factíveis. Um deles, como exemplo, é a promoção da inclusão digital e o aprimoramento dos dados da saúde, que o nosso país precisa tanto. Um outro exemplo é o crescimento de novas tecnologias, como a espectrometria de massa na metabolômica, para um melhor monitoramento terapêutico, além de fomentar a medicina personalizada na redução do custo de tratamento e, finalmente, essa união e a melhoria, e a gente vê exemplos como o Butantan está fazendo, o Fiocruz, a união e a aproximação da academia com a indústria. E, finalmente, o reposicionamento do Brasil na cadeia global de valor da indústria, da saúde, do mercado de diagnóstico in vitro, unindo a pesquisa e desenvolvimento, que é a academia, com a indústria. O segundo pilar fala da regulação. Uma das propostas é dar mais transparência nas análises dos impactos regulatórios. No pilar de regulação, quero dar destaque às ações de convergência regulatória, dando mais visibilidade para todos os atores envolvidos. além de aprimorar e criar novos modelos de atenção à saúde, que utilizam ferramentas de diagnóstico. O terceiro pilar, que é o pilar de acesso, as nossas propostas vão no sentido de uma revisão sistemática do processo de incorporação e obsolescência tecnológica. Então, tão importante quanto é incluir um novo teste, também é tirar testes antigos que hoje não fazem mais sentido clinicamente. Então, esse é um dos grandes motes, né, e o que nos movimenta nesse pilar de acesso. Além de incorporação e utilização de testes point of care, conectividade e novos sistemas de diagnósticos que vêm surgindo. Finalmente, a eliminação de barreiras não tarifárias na importação dos produtos desse setor. E o último pilar, que é o pilar do monitoramento e gestão, queria dar destaque a atualização das listas de referência de procedimentos médicos que parametrizam os preços de compras do mercado IVD e também a adoção de mecanismos de desempenho e compartilhamento de riscos na gestão e aplicação dos recursos em saúde. Com isso, eu finalizo alguma das propostas e se você tiver interesse ou se identificar com algumas delas, por favor, entre em contato conosco e se engaje numa dessas ações que nesse trabalho que nós vamos fazer para o futuro. Esse futuro é o nosso futuro, é o legado que nós podemos deixar para o nosso país e para as próximas gerações. Conto com vocês, muito obrigada, é um prazer estar aqui hoje com vocês, participando desse lançamento.
Excelente, muito obrigado.
Excellent. Thank you, Liliana, and all of you, Patricia and Fabio, that were part of the presentation. I apologize for some technical flaws that we've had. We are still learning, and the system is not as friendly as it should. But I promise we'll have a summary for all of you that weren't able to listen, especially in the English version. Now, the most expected moment is really applying the actions that we bring in our white book, which is gathering the different actors to discuss improvements and projects for really bringing programs for healthcare, bringing the access to diagnostics and better therapy is one of our main roles. And now I open our roundtable, inviting Renuka Gadi to be our moderator.
Thanks again for opening your agenda, Hanan, Alex, Edson, and Rosanna. It's a great pleasure to have you all here. Renuka, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Carlos, and good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Renuka Gade, and I am the Senior Advisor at the Clinton Health Access Initiative, CHAI, focused on diagnostics access to low middle income countries. Just as a quick backdrop, CHAI has established offices in 36 countries and is one of the many organizations that's helping advance access to COVID-19 testing by securing high quality, affordable supplies for low middle income countries. I transitioned to CHAI in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. I come from a private sector background, and so I can draw a very sharp contrast to the recognition and the role of diagnostics pre-COVID and now. As my mentor in the industry would often say, defining diagnostics, he would say, diagnostics is like the Cinderella that is never invited to the ball. It's always an afterthought. And that used to be my message from the private sector, championing for the focus on diagnostics. But contrast that to the current scenario, where the World Health Organization has launched a global collaboration to accelerate access to COVID-19 tools with a focus on equitable access. Diagnostics is one of the key pillars of the ACTA initiative, co-led by FIND and the Global Fund, with several partners, including UNICEF, CHAI, and others. Through this engagement alone, believe it or not, 43 million antigen tests and 36 million PCR tests have been scaled in low-middle income countries to date. So ladies and gentlemen, diagnostics has a seat now at the table in a manner that one can't ever imagine. A point driven home when I was traveling back more recently from my home country, India, back to the US, where I was stopped at multiple checkpoints, sometimes by security, sometimes by just fellow passengers or lay common people who would ask, did you get a PCR test, RT-PCR test done, or a rapid antigen test done prior to boarding the plane? Just that awareness within this community really puts us in a very different context when you're talking about diagnostics today. While this seems to be a giant step forward, let's not forget the huge setback we're also witnessing, particularly in the progress in HIV, TB, malaria, and not to forget the context of the antimicrobial resistance and the role of diagnostics in that context. So in my view, we need to seize the moment and continue our advocacy for diagnostics so that this wave is not just a wave, but it's here to stay with us, that this becomes an embedded part of response, even when it's not a pandemic situation and when we are back to normal. What better way to engage on this topic than hearing from our experts in the round table? And I hope that panelists today in the session were able to explore a bit about the role of testing, the needs to have a dynamic policy guidance that's not measured in multiple months during an emergency situation, such as the pandemic, the role that diagnostics can play in not only individual diagnostic, but in public health screening, and how can we create that evidence and make this a deeply embedded part of any response. But before we get there, I want to kind of introduce our panelists in a different way. Even if I can read a short bio of each of you, it will consume the hour. So I'm going to start a very different way of introduction. I'm going to request each one of you to say no more than 3 bullets about what you want the audience to know about who you are, where you are from, or any fun fact, I don't know, but 3 bullets and no more. Will probably the best way to start this is to go in an alphabetical order. So we have Alex Costa, Carlos, Edison Araujo, Hanan Balki, and Rosanna in that order. Why don't we start off, and keep in mind this is going to be an interactive, rich discussion. So Alex, set us off.
Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. Thanks very much for the invitation to be part of this panel. As I said, my name is Alex Costa. I work for UNICEF headquarters in New York, and I'm a diagnostics advisor and the coordinator for antimicrobial resistance, UNICEF's response on AMR. And one thing I think you should know about me is that I'm Brazilian, eu sou brasileiro, but I'm going to do this in English because of the audience. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks, Alex. You're more than welcome. Well, my name is Carlos Gouveia. I'm currently the executive president for CBDL, the In Vitro Diagnostic Association, and also ALADIV, the Latin American Alliance for the Development of In Vitro Diagnostics. I happen to be a lawyer and also public administrator by graduation and with an MBA in administration and an MBA. It's really great to have you all here. Edson?
I'm sorry, but I don't hear anything. I don't know if I'm the only one who cannot hear anything.
Hanan, can you hear us? Hanan?
I think we can hear, but Hanan, no? Hanan, see you are on mute, so I don't know.
No, if I open it, I don't know if you can hear. I don't know if I'm disturbing the flow, but I just don't know where everybody's at. I'm sorry.
Oh,
but can you hear us? You can hear us or not? Yeah.
Could Hanan connect by phone?
Hanan, can you hear us?
I can hear, Renuka, I can hear you, but I didn't hear Alex speak or anybody else. I just hear you and I just heard Rosanna.
Okay, so somehow Alex is the one who everyone's not able to hear. but we're being able to be heard. So I don't know if Letitia, the organizers, if you can look into that snafu there. And I think Alex just introduced himself, Hanan, to say he's from UNICEF and a Brazilian and proud to be in this session. We went to Carlos next. And now we're going to Edson, if you're on the line. I don't see you. Edson?
Yeah, it's can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody. I'm Edson Araújo, I'm a senior economist at the World Bank. I'm based in Washington, DC, but currently I'm in Brasilia. So in the bank, I'm task team leader for Brazil and a few countries in the West African region. And as Alex and other, I'm happy to be Brazilian as well and following the pattern and speaking English. Thank you, and over.
Thank you. Rosanna?
Hi, everyone. My name is Rosanna Peeling. I'm a medical microbiologist, and I'm currently at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, where I have a chair in diagnostics research. At the London School, after I left WHO, I started an international diagnostics center, which now has hubs all around the world. So the other thing that I like to say is that from 2000 to 2009, I was at WHO, first as head of diagnostics research at the TDR, the Special Program for Research and Training in Tropical Diseases, and then also later became the research coordinator, as well as the head of the ethics committee at WHO. Over, thanks.
Thank you all. So amazing background. And maybe I'll start off with you, Hanan. WHO set the global stage for diagnostics in such a prominent way with this ACTA initiative with the diagnostic pillar. But maybe I want you to kind of explain what happened behind the scenes. How did that come to bear? Tell us a little more about how this all happened and a bit about ACTA for the audience in general.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. And I hope everybody can hear me at least. If you can just give me the thumbs up for that. Okay, great. Excellent, thank you. So maybe I'll introduce myself as well, Renuka, because I didn't have the chance to do so. So I'm Hanan Balki. I'm from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I'm a pediatrician infectious diseases person by training and have been at the country level for 20 years prior to coming to WHO in 2019 to be the Assistant Director General for AMR, which was a newly developed, established division to specifically address this extremely complex topic. I think other than that, I'm a mother of two lovely boys, and I've been stuck in dealing with outbreaks at different levels my whole life. So this is just one other yet big one. So that's my introduction, Nuka. And going to the to your question. Again, I think framing this pandemic, we need to say that this is the pandemic of the century. So I think the collaborative work that took place in creating the ACTA was a must. I think the world would have been remiss if we had not done something like that. And I think even reflecting on the progress of the ACTA partners and they're working together, the question is, why are we not, or why have we not collaborated in this fashion and even better on many other topics from a long time ago? WHO, as you know, it's the lead global health agency that deals with 194 organizations, member states, apologies. And we work with our partners and member states through our regional offices and country offices to ensure that we can provide the norms and standards on the health topics, but at the same time, partner and provide convening powers for the other organizations and partners and civil society to work together with the member states and governments to bring those populations into the best health condition possible for better prosperity, economical impact, and it's about lives and livelihoods. And this pandemic, what is unique about it, reflecting, as I mentioned in my previous career back in Riyadh, and the region where I worked on the AMR national action plans for antimicrobial resistance prior to joining WHO. I think that it's important that we understand that the whole issue of outbreaks is always an issue and gets the headlines when it's a problem. The prevention of all of this and the response to all of this is not very attractive to policymakers, heads of states, even other healthcare providers who are not in our field of the response and preparedness sector. So I think that I can be sometimes a bit pessimistic, saying that I really hope we don't have an amnestic, have amnesia after this pandemic and forget what happened to us, because humans tend to forget. Now, when you ask me, how did the diagnostics come about? To me, it's definitely a no-brainer. In order to fix something, you have to know what is it that you're fixing. And that's exactly what a diagnostic tool is. For me, as a clinician, as a pediatrician, an infectious disease person who's been at the bedside for 25 years, I think that without diagnosis, you're flying blind and it becomes extremely dangerous. So including diagnostics was not an innovative thought. It is a must and a needed entity in managing a disease at a human level or at a community level, and definitely at a pandemic level. When we talk about diagnosis, for me, again, and for clinicians, it starts by a clinical diagnosis. No tools, no nothing. You start with the history, signs and symptoms, observation, physical exam, then you go into diagnostics, then you go into follow-up, and so on and so forth. So for me, what's frustrating a little bit is that diagnostics in some of our discussions seems to be looked at as a specific tool. Give them this test, this is going to be fixed. Give them this vaccine, this is going to be fixed. This is not how medicine works. This is not how managing such situation works. We need to understand that diagnostic tools is something that is needed to be developed, based, and utilized in the proper way. So I think the Director General of the WHO, in working with the major partners at the very beginning and launching in April 2020, the actual act itself, including the 3 pillars, was extremely important. The initial thought was, again, as everybody remembers, it was about COVAX, it was about vaccines, and then it was immediately redesigned to include 3 vertical pillars and health systems connector as a horizontal pillar, to make sure that a lot of the connective parts at the health systems level takes place. Again, we can always discuss how this is going to work, and I want to share maybe with the audience that the difficulty at the beginning was, how long is this pandemic going to last? What are we setting up ACTA to do, and for how long? And all of those, that's exactly what was happening behind the scenes, and maybe not so much behind the scenes, but those were the logical questions. For how long do we want this collaborative effort, and what is their aim? And the aim was that at the very beginning was that we need to have the upper end or the upper flow of things. We need to make sure that R&D works really hard to provide us with the tools, whether it's vaccines, therapeutics, or diagnostics. Each one of the pillars had that, to make sure that the companies, especially the smaller ones, are able to progress. So we know for vaccines, we have over 280 in the pipeline. For diagnostics, we have close to 80 diagnostics that are being developed. We already have in the EUL for WHO 4 antigen RDTs and around 20-something NATs, and only 1 serological test. So the whole idea is that we have to push these companies and support them so that they can bring the R&D, the innovation to the table. And after that, the WHO has to do its normal work, which is preparing the countries. Again, we were supported by many organizations, specifically CHAI, the Gates Fund, Global Fund, Bill and Gates, the Gates Melinda Foundation. So a lot of these organizations work together, and the WHO, again, as having 194 member states, was very keen on making sure that the countries are ready. Now, there's a lot of detail in what needs to go into the member state or a specific country. They have to have regulatory procedures and processes that take place, and that is extremely complex, as you know. WHO is working really hard to make sure that the timelines are no longer straight, but overlapping in the process of engaging with the R&D and with the research entities, so that the timelines from production to products available to regulatory processes take place, that there's a collaborative work that is done to help. So that's a little bit of the discussion behind the scenes, that we have to work together. We have to shorten timelines. We have to bring this to the whole world together. The issue of equity, fair distribution is extreme priority for the WHO. And I don't think I need to reiterate that. I think it's clear in the WHO messages from our DG and from all of us, whether at the higher leadership level or through our technical networks. We are very keen that there is equity in distributing the tools, and that the countries are able, and maybe I'll elaborate a little bit on that in the next question, but maybe I'll stop here and hand it back over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hanan. Very, very interesting. And I like the term that you use. Let's not get into a more of amnesia once this is over. I quickly want, Carlos, you have another launch, just like the ACTA was launched, you've launched now a book, Handbook on Diagnostics in Brazil. Can you tell me what would be the 2 points or the 3 max that you want people to remember from this book that you just launched and the videos that we happen to see? Some clearly, some not, but just tell us what would be the 3 key takeaways that you want people to remember.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Renuka. Hanan, do you hear me now? Yeah, so Alex and Edson, just a quick remark, just put in English in the interpretation. So we are all in the same channel. Sorry, we just found out now. But anyway, thanks a lot for the question. The white book of the laboratory diagnostics is really a lot of things to see and understand. Basically, we have a very good overview on the life cycle of diagnostic, taking into consideration 4 major pillars. So first is research, development, and innovation. Second is regulation, pre- and post-market analysis. Then access, not only for the public, but also for the private sector, how to incorporate a new product. And finally, monitoring and managing the whole market arena. So taking into consideration, we're basically we have had a very deep analysis of the market, coming with several proposals. These proposals are very clear. What to do and to achieve, how, and especially who would be taking this initiative together with us. So in terms of takeaways, Renuka, I would say it's really important to prepare the market. So convergence in terms of regulation is essential. Not only regulatory convergence, but also to have a good monitoring of the origin in terms of technology. So the countries need to be prepared to take new products innovation in order to speed up access to therapy. That's one. Second, I think it's really to work in a cooperative way. The cooperation and this alliance, this big network or constellation, if you may want to call, it's really essential. CBDL is only representative in not only in Brazil, but also I would dare to say in the global arena, because we have always taken others together with us in order to achieve a project. So this combination of efforts has been essential in order to promote a good pathway to the innovation and access to health. So these are 2 major ones that I think would summarize. And there are many others, and I'll be glad to go over and elaborate more if we have time.
Thanks, Carlos. And I think you alluded to an interesting point. Cooperation and regulation, both are interesting. And when you think of regulatory affairs, you think of the voice of Dr. Rosanna Peeling, who's been talking about simplifying regulatory pathways for creating greater access, really championing the issue for a very long time now. And Rosanna, the question to you is, in the context of this new wave of pandemic, this new tools or the new diagnostic tests, antigen tests that we've not had before, what do you see as key challenges in the diagnostic arena, if you will? And if you want to add any other comment in the context of regulatory, that would be great too.
Thank you. I think there are two issues that I like to bring out. One is the variation in terms of the capacity to do a stringent sort of regulatory review and approval processes, and I think that what WHO is doing, issuing guidance on regulatory reliance, and what Carlos have been doing with this book, and actually bringing these issues about regulation, making it very clear what is it about and what it isn't about, so that people are very clear on the role of regulation in assuring the quality of the diagnostics. I mean, we've never had so many diagnostics for one disease as we have now. And how do you assure the quality? And regulatory approval processes are, one of them. But we don't want it to take forever, right? So I think that reliance and simplification really needs to happen. And the more guidance that countries have with regard to how to do that, that would be really important to be able to speed up the approval of good tests to save lives and livelihoods, right? And then the second part that I want to talk about is after the tests have been approved, then you have the policy development part, right? And as Hanan says, maybe we don't want that to be a sequential process. We want it to overlap so that it could happen quicker. But policymakers are telling me, well, we need evidence to make policy. And, years at the Canadian government as well as at WHO, I know that for guidelines, we always do systematic reviews or commission them. And then we look at all the evidence, weigh the quality of the evidence, whether it's randomized control trial, etc. And it's a long process. I mean, at WHO, our guideline processes actually usually take at least a year. But in a pandemic, we don't have time to do that. We don't even have time to do randomized controlled trials, right? And so how do you make policy? What kind of evidence can you use to make policy in a pandemic is something really important to consider. And we could learn from countries that have done it well. And I think this needs to be a lot more sharing.
Excellent points and very clear, Rosanna, as always. So if I might just kind of go back to you on a very quick follow-up. If there is a WHO-approved EUL test, in your personal view, do you think you still need to do country-based testing for the same test that's been EUL approved? You do need to have a stringent SRA because, as you said, there's so many new tests for one disease at one time. But can you comment on that particular aspect? Because sometimes, even with the WHO EUL approval, it can take many, many months for a country to redo the process. Just a very quick point on that, because we do want to get to round two and to the rest of the panelists.
Yeah, so we've heard from companies that said that even though their product had been approved by the US FDA and by WHO through the emergency authorization process, one company said they are still being asked by 60 countries to do trials in their country. So I think there is some kind of misunderstanding, or that is countries are not that they're suspicious of the emergency authorization process, but somehow they say legally in country we need country data in order to approve, and so sometimes we need to think about, in an emergency, would you override that? Should regulatory authorities each country have an emergency authorization process that is aligned with WHO and regional authorities?
Great. So you just identified a unique challenge, and maybe see if we can get to a kind of response from the team. But let me first move on to Edson, to you. You are a senior economist at the World Bank, Brazilian ethnicity, and currently you are in Brazil engaging with the Ministry of Health. And what, in your view, should be the testing plans and priorities in Brazil? Because I think it's fair to say that for onlookers, it seemed like the testing movement in Brazil took a little bit longer in the context of the country, and for good reasons perhaps, but can you reflect on why this was the case and what your recommendations would be?
Thanks, Anuka. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. First, just congratulate Carlos and the organizer, both for the event, but also for the white book. And also thanks for the invitation. It's been very interesting to hear about the conversation so far. And just one thing, if you allow me, before going to your questions, I think many things that have been said today is very important. And they start from Fabio when he started to talk about the commercial deficit that Brazil has in the health sector. We have a deficit of over $5 billion a year. And that brings the attention also to the economic aspect of it. So Brazil does need to invest in these technologies that have been discussed. This is one. The second is I like very much what Rosanna was talking about in terms of evidence and the speed of the decision-making process during the pandemic. A year ago, we had the World Bank launching a program to support countries to respond to COVID. We had over $12 billion. And in many countries, we tried to buy COVID tests. And back then, it was almost impossible to find suppliers. Right? So, and then we are literally running around and trying to get these tests to countries. And at the same time, we need to balance the need to have evidence to invest the resources in what we know that works. And sometimes, of course, policymakers have some doubts about what is working because everything is new. But at the same time, there's a need for a speedy response. Right? So I'm saying that because I think it's an important point, and all of us who are involved in policymaking over the last 12 years has been facing this challenge. Right? So it's very important to discuss that. And in particular now, back to your question about Brazil, I think one of the challenges is the capacity to process tests we didn't have. The country didn't have, and of course, no country had it. As I said, a year ago, we are running around trying to find X-gene machines, PCR tests, and everything. You know more than I know about this. But so I think there was a physical challenge. Right? There was a constraint that we couldn't do more. Right? And then brings to the point that's been discussed also, which is the technology advancement. We had such an incredible movement in the sector to produce new tests and more rapid tests. And that also emphasizes the importance of investing in research and development, right? Especially during such a short period of time. Of course, we all talk about vaccines, as you know, how fast we develop those, but the testing, I think, is even more a bigger success, because the vaccine is still have temporary authorization, new work, and what's going to happen in the future, we're going to need a boost, etc., etc. But the tests, we know that they work and they are giving results. So, but then, Ranuka, comes back to your question on what Brazil needs to do. And to answer that again, I go back to Rosanna, because even if we were talking about using the antigen test, right, which is the rapid test that's available now, when they start to discuss that, there was a lot of resistance because we are not sure about the sensitivity of the test and how accurate those tests are. But at the same time, we know that capacity to do the more gold standard tests is limited. So we do need to move as fast as possible. You know? So I think now the way forward is clear. Brazil, not only Brazil, but many other countries are learning from the experience of using antigen tests for COVID. And I think that's a good example of everything that's been discussed. Right? We need a rapid response. We need investment in technology and research to give the policymakers the tools to respond to the emergency. And one last point is, I think, as we all know, in the health sector, it's been a very challenging time, but also a very critical and crucial time for the future. We know now how good preparedness, how good technology available can help to create the economic environment for people to work, to engage in commercial activities, etc., etc. So I think this intersection between economy and health is stronger than ever, and I hope we can get these lessons, you know, to do all you're discussing here today, you know, having best evidence available, best research and development available to provide the tools that we need to respond to emergencies like the one we are living now. I stop here. Thanks, Aloka.
Thank you so much. I want to go to Alex. Alex, you have such a wide, vast international experience. You've witnessed the unique opportunity with diagnostics now, especially in your role, both at UNICEF, but you're also leading the country-led working group at ACTA. What is your take on barriers, challenges, solutions? What's coming to your mind when you listen to this commentary from the panelists as well?
Well, what comes to my mind is, and I'm going to repeat some of the things that were said, since I'm the last one in line, that COVID-19 has created an unprecedented global crisis, but at the same time, it has created a number of opportunities. And one of them is the opportunity to strengthen diagnostics on a global scale. Have you noticed, as you mentioned on your story about the airport, have you noticed how you can now talk to regular people about diagnostics? The people talk about the difference between PCR and antigen rapid diagnostic tests. The other day I was having a conversation with my family about positive predictive value of tests. This level of diagnostic literacy on a global scale is something that never happened before. And I think there's an opportunity here. We must seize this opportunity and build on this foundation in order to improve diagnostic systems, especially in low and middle income countries, not only to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic and bring the pandemic under control, but also beyond COVID-19. And I think that's where the opportunity really lies. We are all familiar with the role of diagnostics in patient diagnosis and treatment, but diagnosis plays a number of other roles that sometimes are invisible to people in pandemic preparedness and surveillance of diseases and outbreak response, and the control of drug-resistant infections, antimicrobial resistance, diagnosis and control, to inform public health policy and guidelines for treatment. There's a variety of things for border control. We're going to start flying right now. Workplace safety, to determine the efficacy of vaccines. There's a variety of things that diagnostics plays a critical role. And I think we working on diagnostics have the responsibility to remind and inform people about the importance of diagnostics, but to formally advocate with key stakeholders on the essential role that diagnostics plays if you're going to build a robust and resilient health system.
Thank you, Alex. And I'll come back with a rapid round questions. I know we're up almost against the hour, but for those who can stay on, please do so because we've now built the momentum in the discussions. So Hanan, back to you. There was a lot of discussion on the role of policy during a pandemic, the role of policy that you need to look at when life is constant, but the need to create perhaps this dynamic policy, the chicken and the egg. Do you wait for the evidence? Don't you wait for the evidence? And how do you manage this in a constantly changing situation? When WHO EUL got established, it wasn't sure if antigen tests would have this high specificity. Now you have these tests, a lot of them, 99%. What does that mean for antigen testing? Would there be new applications, new guidance, new policies? Because the world still looks up to WHO, and we fully understand the challenges of presenting a policy without evidence. But somehow in the vaccine world, there seems to be a lot more dynamism and movement in that context. And do you think we can get there with diagnostics, or perhaps there's already some thinking? Hanan, so your response.
Thank you very much, and thank you to my colleagues online who commented. Very nice discussion. Again, I think it's unfair for diagnostics to be compared to vaccines and what has happening in the vaccine world with diagnostics, because vaccines is a one shot, a two shot, a booster, maybe not a booster. So it's very limited how many times you're going to vaccinate somebody, right? But diagnostics is a continuous tool that needs to be used at the bedside and at the national level, and as you can see now, at the global level, if you want to take whole genome sequencing as a diagnostic tool. So they're two very different animals to compare on. Number two is that the vaccines provides a solution. Diagnostics provides confusion. Am I positive? Am I negative? Am I going to infect somebody? Am I infected? Am I colonized? So the dialogue is very different. So I won't take it personal that I'm leaving the diagnostic pillar if we are not doing as well as vaccines, because they are totally non-comparable beasts to start with. That's number one. Number two, in the diagnostics, you have the diagnostics for different purposes. For vaccines, the vaccine purpose is one. Well, it could be two, is to prevent death and severe illness and to produce immunity. Diagnostics has many other reasons. You want, for example, if we want to talk about whole genome sequencing as a tool, one of the main reasons why we need multiple sites distributed throughout the world, as everybody knows what I'm going to say, to pick up the variants, of concern, then to guide the vaccines to go about and do what they need to do, and to make sure that the diagnostics are still picking up those viruses, right? So I think, so that's one thing that I want to clarify, that diagnostics is a very different area, very different dialogue and discussion. Then you have the three areas of diagnostics, just very briefly. As you all know, you have the NATs, or the nuclear tests, versus the rapid antigen tests. Then you have the serological tests. Each one of them has, especially the serological one, has a different purpose. It's not for acute infection diagnosis or picking up. Then among the rapid antigen tests, you have the fully independent self-testing, all the way up to laboratory or point of care or healthcare facility. So again, you have a variety, and people continue to confuse. The literacy that Alex had spoken about, or Edson, I forget who mentioned about the family talking about positive predictive values. That's true. But them speaking about these things, I feel that a lot of the people are saying the words, but they don't understand the true depth of and the complexity of this issue, and what does it actually mean. The other thing I wanted to highlight is that WHO's role is to develop guidelines and guidance. Countries are expected to develop the policy. WHO can develop policy briefs, and this is where it becomes very difficult, because I was in that position before. I was at the country level, leading the infection prevention and control at the national and regional level. And my role was to take the best guidelines out there, WHO, ECDC, CDC, whatever exists, those were the big three main ones, and change that language into a policy that my organization can implement. That requires knowledge about the process. How do you do it? It also requires that you understand the resources of that specific scenario. And even for me then, doing that at the country level, for infection prevention and control, there was a lot of back and forth between me as leading IPC and the stakeholders, whether they're physicians, nurses, pharmacists, my CEO, all of those individuals have to be part of that dialogue, and developing frequent asked questions really helps decipher. I think that's what we're doing with the guidelines for diagnostics in WHO. If you don't take those things to the broader community out there, we as policy people and developing our flow charts and doing all of that stuff, we won't be informed enough. So I think I want to emphasize that as well. I want to mention that the diagnostics, because the virus continues to mutate, and because I think we're going to be going from this major fiery pandemic to a situation where certain communities are able to implement good public health interventions, whatever that constellation of interventions can be in a specific community, good immunity, good vaccination, good distancing, good hand hygiene, all that, the public health interventions, and you'll have low transmission, and you will have areas where it keeps popping up around the world. And I assume that that's going to continue for a bit of time. And that's where the policy development in the countries has to take those variations and variabilities into account and have to continue to revise their policy about what they want to do. Now, what we saw in this pandemic that again makes it super, super unique is the fact that it hit high, mid, low income countries all at the same time with the same aggressiveness, but we saw the ability to respond, whether it was because of resources, the ability to implement public health intervention was so variable around the world, right? And I think what for the public health and the government representatives in this webinar, I think that's my key message, is that it has to be contextualized to the country and then again within the country to the specific community. I think the ones who are going to be doing well are the countries or the member states that already went in the second phase of the shock. It happened, there's a pandemic, it's here, it's not, because at the very beginning, everybody was asking me, my friends and family were saying, Hanan, 2 months and we're done, 3 months and we're done, 6 months and we're done. And I'm like, at the beginning, I was saying a year and a half. Now I think it's gonna be a bit longer. I don't want to say a word, but it's going to be a bit longer. And we're going to have to incorporate interventions within our communities that take into account that the virus transmits easily. And we have to make sure that we have our communities live with very loose chains of transmission. Because any pandemic or outbreak, it is about breaking the chain of transmission. That's rule number one. However you do that is fine. Okay, you can't lock everybody in their homes, and some communities don't even have the privilege of having space in their houses. It's challenging. So when it comes to the WHO guidelines, it's interim guidelines if you look at it. We are also reviewing it again at the moment, specifically for the antigen RDT. Another message that I would hope can go out there is that those who are using the antigen RDTs in specific fashions, like at border entry, at asymptomatic, at home, that they collect the data. Not everybody implementing it can do that, but implementation research is something that WHO has done again with our partners. Collecting that kind of data would be extremely important for WHO and for these entities that want to get them approved for certain functions. So I think those are, I can go on and on because I love talking about country response and how to engage, but I think I'll stop here and allow for my colleagues.
That's great. I'm actually glad I threw in the vaccine there because it allowed you to explain this in a manner that can stick with us and stay with us in a deeper fashion. So I really appreciate the clarity of your response and also the call to action from your point. WHO is doing what they're doing, but the country and policy, it has to be in the context of the country and the community, which I think is a very good key takeaway as well for the audience, which brings me to some rapid closing comments here. Country evidence, community evidence. Rosanna and Carlos, let me look at you as a pair, one that is presenting the national, one that is more global. Is there a way that you can advance this country context dialogue through quick evidence studies? If so, what are some of the ideas out there? Because we can't just look to WHO alone to drive country level action.
If I may, Renuka, what I would say is that Brazil has some good experience in that, can progress quite a lot. But I would say in the beginning of the pandemic, we had the challenge, what kind of diagnostic should we use for COVID? There was not enough product in the market. Actually, it was being developed as the pandemic was starting. So together with Anvisa and Ministry of Health, we discussed a change in the regulation in order to have a fast track rule for new tests being developed. So Anvisa was quick enough to present that in a very wise way, and they gave 1 year validity and registration period of time. And if the company would provide further evidence of shelf life, stability studies, they could upgrade to the normal stage. That was one, access. Second, quality. It's a question, what about these products coming into the market? So again, with the support of London School And with Rosanna, by March 18th, I was there in London, we discussed how could we have a program. And initially with the Clinical Pathology Society in Brazil, and later on with the Clinical Analysis and Abramed, which is the Laboratory Association, we developed a unique program of assessment, evaluation of COVID diagnostic kits that were coming into the market. So under this kind of consortium of 13 public and private labs with access to samples from patients in hospitals, we have evaluated a large number of products. Initially serological tests, later on molecular, PCR, now antigen. We are evaluating several new antigen rapid tests that are coming into the market. And all these results are obtained after a common protocol, and the results are published in a website. So they have several objectives. First, to give to the market a kind of reference. So sensitivity, specificity, predictive, negative and positive predictive value. So a kind of performance data. That's one. Second, for Anvisa, our regulator, it's a kind of post-market surveillance information. So it helps them to guide their actions and to monitor what is coming into the market. And last but not least, for manufacturers and importers, they could have a good indication of what real life samples are showing in terms of results with their products. And because of that, they have been able to upgrade. And last but not least, it's really important, again, to promote, to reach the invisible citizen that is there. Most of the people do not have access normally to a lab, to a hospital, for many reasons. Sometimes they don't want. In the case of COVID, they didn't want. So it was important to go beyond the hospital and labs and to include, Anvisa allowed that, pharmacies and drugstores as a healthcare center where they could be tested with rapid tests, and even companies with the support of labs or skilled professionals that they could also test their own workforce and so on. So there are innumerous, several different examples, but it's really important to get everyone with the same objective. The civil society can really play a positive role. In the example of this program of evaluation, we have tested over 16,000 samples of real-life patients, just as an example. That's a good evidence.
Rosanna, quickly, could you add to this to say what's on your mind?
Rosanna, you're mute.
I'm just so pleased that Carlos, you already started to talk about, what we've done, because, when we last talked last March, when you were in London, we never thought that we would not be able to see each other again or have all the meetings that we want. What we've been doing is trying to have as many public platforms as possible for countries, for companies, for all stakeholders to share data, share what worked, what didn't work. Because if we only rely on publications, peer-reviewed publications, it may be just way too late. So we started to do lots of webinars, in a way, doing a little bit of capacity building just to make sure, as Hanan says, that diagnostics doesn't create more confusion, and quite often it does. So the webinars allow us to actually go into a lot of the basic principles. How do you interpret tests? How do you, look at predictive values, etc. So I think that through this, we hope that not only are we sharing what worked, what didn't work, but we raise the capacity of countries to be able to have a firmer ground on which they could tell what are good quality diagnostics, and for the policymakers to be able to make decisions that are foreign to them, because we're now using diagnostics in non-health sector settings, right? And so we need them to be supported by evidence from other countries that things worked, or that they don't repeat the mistake of what didn't work. So I think more collaboration, more public platform to be able to do this would be the way to go. And I'm very pleased with our collaboration with Carlos, and it's just been fantastic since last March that we managed to get so much done. Thank you.
I think the point that you made on diagnostics being used in non-healthcare settings, and therefore the need for greater evidence or sharing best practices, not losing time in trying to recreate studies or wait for publications, which can be a very lengthy process. So I'll kind of pivot that question a bit to you, Alex. You spoke about literacy, diagnostic literacy, and you actually said something that it is our responsibility then to continue to raise awareness and create these sessions. So what can we expect from the country diagnostics working group team that you're leading, or any other solutions that come to your mind as you hear some of these barriers that to keep information alive and drive that country action?
So I'm going to answer your question while connecting it to the question that both Carlos and Rosanna were answering about the role of, what can we do in order to improve the country response? And I think that's exactly where the ACT-A Country Support Working Group comes in. It's really trying to understand what the needs are and provide the necessary support. So I'll touch on a few things here. One of them is, and I think Rosanna was talking about it, and you asked that question specifically, is that we're basically building the plane while we fly it. There's a lot of unknowns, and we're in the process of understanding more about this virus and about the disease. So there's a clear need for operational research in order to fill in these knowledge gaps that will then guide the public response. And this is going to happen at the country level. A second thing that was quite important, and it's something that we're responsible for and we're trying to solve, is the need for an integrated response instead of this siloed approach that we are all guilty of when it comes to global health. It's not vaccines or diagnostics or therapeutics or health system strengthening, it's all of them together. We are basically watching how vaccine is taking most of the air in the room, most of the resources on the table. But the reality is that vaccines, though it's probably the most important tool in the box, it's not going to deal with the problem. It's not going to bring the pandemic under control alone. Diagnostics are the eyes and the ears into the pandemic, and we need it even to see whether the vaccine is working, let alone to actually monitor who's infected, how the virus is mutating, how it's spreading, in order to bring this under control. The third point I want to make is one thing that has emerged in the discussions we had in the country support working group is how human resource capacity is a bottleneck for testing. This preceded COVID-19. We already knew this was a problem because diagnostics is often neglected. It's just that the pandemic has really exposed how human resource capacity is really lacking when it comes to diagnostics. So you can put a number of systems in place. You can provide the test free of charge. You can develop new tests. But at the end of the day, if you don't have a health system with a labor force that's capable of delivering the tests, we're not going to be able to bring the pandemic under control, and we're going to suffer these problems later on with other diseases as well. So there's a clear need to increase the level of training, to have more people and people who are certified in order to provide the tests. And in that regard, I think the engagement with the private sector is another topic that has emerged. The importance of engaging the private sector as private providers in order to test. So private pharmacies, private clinics, private workers, healthcare workers that can really accelerate and increase access to tests, especially in resource limited settings and more remote locations. And I think the final point, coming back to the question you asked, is it's very clear that we have to scale up our communication, advocacy efforts, and the engagement with communities. At the end of the day, especially we're living at a time where I think the truth and the facts and the science are probably the biggest victims of this process that we're going through. And we really need to increase the level of advocacy and communications and community engagement to reduce hesitancy, to counteract the rumors that are being spread. And this is not just about vaccines. The same thing is happening with diagnostics. So I'll stop here and hand it back to you. Thanks, Renuka.
Many valuable nuggets of wisdom in those comments, and we'll wrap up very soon. I have just two more questions and we'll do a wrap. A question that came from the audience to you, Hanan, perhaps is, how is WHO dealing with data protection concerning diagnostics and vaccines of COVID-19? How to compatibilize individual rights with social needs during the pandemic, especially concerning data protection? I think the question is on data protection. So I don't know if you have a quick response, Hanan, to this question.
Thank you. I did read the question. I'm not sure what do they mean about data protection on diagnostics. Do they mean the dossier submitted for approval for EOL process, like that information? Maybe that's what they mean. I'm not sure, because that is dealt with confidentially through our assessors. Yeah.
Perhaps you can comment on also the need to have, connectivity and data solutions within a country's context to understand pandemic, and you need to have a good lab information system, even from an AMR surveillance perspective, right? And some countries host that surveillance very much within their borders. Some are reluctant.
I think, Anuka, what the question is, because I did get this kind of question sometimes even from families and friends, is that some people might think sometimes, and I'm sorry if I'm really twisting the question too much, but that's how maybe it meant, and maybe Rosanna can assist me here as being a previous person working in this area. But some people think that WHO has access to country data that is with a name and with a label. When the countries send data on the numbers of COVID tests, for example, because WHO hosts huge amounts of data from the countries, but these are all anonymous, coded data. They don't have names, but they do have age and sex sometimes, so depending on the program that you're talking about. So that's how I would answer this, is that we don't have information on person with humans' names on it. So there's nothing like that. And then in our platforms, again, for countries to submit their data and the rates, for example, of their COVID cases, it's mere numbers. So with maybe some information on age and sex, just so that they can do some of the epidemiological analysis, which the WHE division, the emergency response, does analyze and look into data. But I think maybe that's what they were alluding to. I don't know, maybe I will defer to Rosanna. Maybe she wants to answer this question.
Yes, so reporting to WHO, especially, in a surveillance platform, that's completely voluntary. And also WHO has very clear guidelines on how to report. And there's never personal information, even from small collectivities, which you may be able to identify a small community. I mean, that is all actually, WHO has a lot of advice about that, so that if you're reporting from a small island state versus a big country, it's the same level of confidentiality and privacy. So as head of the ethics committee at WHO, we're very, very strong about that. So
no further explanation needed. Driven the point home to say confidentiality is key and vital and always protected. Doesn't matter what context that question was. I think that answer should be very encouraging. And I want to kind of almost wrap up this, but I want to ask Edson one question. What can we expect from a World Bank support to Brazil? Can we expect that there would be an increased uptake of testing now? What's brewing in your part of the world, so to say? I'm
Thanks.
not.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, please.
Look, I cannot speak on, but from the bank side, we discuss abilities on both technical assistance and financial assistance. Of course, Brazil has it's critical, but the COVID response. So countries such as Brazil, technical assistance probably is the area that we can contribute more. One thing that has been discussed here, it's very valuable for the situation in Brazil, is this exchange of experience, right? As I mentioned before, this balance between putting resources on some testing strategy and also the evidence is a challenge. And also, it takes some time. When we see the published literature talk more about modeling, which is great, but for policymakers, they do need actual data, right? And one of the things we've been doing in supporting the government is going around and exploring counter experience, with specialists from different organizations. So that's, I think, one thing that is very helpful in the case of Brazil, the global experience. So doing what has been said, what are the other alternatives? Also that means now is seen outside the. This is a challenge, and I think it's a lot to learn the culture in Brazil. Over my internet.
Yeah, the internet is not the best connection.
Yeah.
I wasn't able to fully get what you're saying, but I think suffice to say that agencies such as the World Bank, and as you are doing, are working with the ministry in that context to fast track some of these programs from policy making and modeling and surveillance. So that's kind of the context I got. I apologize, the line is not the best.
Excuse me. Renuka,
me.
if I may, I think what is important to complement is in the case of Brazil, we have already done a lot in the private sector. The Ministry of Health itself is trying to do a lot, and it has to do a lot. Like Alex indicated, the private sector can really play an important role, but in a large country with over 200, with a large population like we have here, it's important that we have public policies in place, especially for massive testing. The vaccination is happening, unfortunately, not at the speed we wanted. So if we don't monitor the population, especially those, like Hanan said, that cannot stay at home, cannot avoid the risk of infection, we must test as soon and as frequent as possible. That's one thing. The diagnostic industry is trying to bring as many tools as possible, remembering what Rosanna likes to say, there is no perfect test. There is the right test for the right patient at the right time, at the right environment. So it's a combination of tools that will lead to the best solution for a public health program like we need in all of our countries. So Brazil is one example. We have several others that are taking part in this webinar and will watch and follow. So I think we do have a very good opportunity to put in practice several of the points that we discussed, like actions like ACT8, that Alex is one of the leaders in one working group, and what Hanan has said, and what Rosanna has been promoted, as you as well.
Okay, so thank you, Carlos, and we'll just bring this back to an end. I first want to say congratulations to CBDL for the launch of the White Book and for the opportunity then to have this deep discussion, several key points. Let's not have diagnostics amnesia. Let's understand diagnostics is complex, and therefore it's not just like one stroke of policy that can give you a guidance. And in any case, there are WHO guidelines and guidance, and then there is a lot of country-based activity that has to happen. Let's not forget collaboration, as we evidence with London School and the country of Brazil, because country action, country modeling, country surveillance, country studies can accelerate the process. Let's engage key stakeholders, World Bank as case in point, to help catalyze some of these discussions and conversations. And the very fine points made by Alex Costa to say diagnostics literacy is important. It's the eyes and the ears, so to say, and not to have a siloed approach to look at not just a vaccine or a therapeutic, but as a connected challenge that we all have to overcome, and not to forget that since this is moving to non-healthcare settings, particularly the engagement of not only private providers of health, but also communities is key. So I think there was a lot of good, bold, good commentary, and we hope that we can continue the discussions to actually say, what is that country guidance that's changed from where we started today? What are some of the studies that you've worked on? How are we engaging communities? And what is the role of catalysts like the WHO and World Bank in moving us along? So with that, thank you, and I'm turning it over back to you.
Just one thing. I'd like that to give a credit to the board of CBDL. So please, if you the ones that you are here, I see Fernando, I see Fulvio, I see Vitor,
Patrícia.
I think I saw Eliane as well. So it's important to mention here, we are a little bit out of time already, that these professionals work along with all of us here and provided a lot of support, not only for this book, but also for the whole work that we've been doing across these last 2 years. So I'd like to thank all of them. So I'm not sure who is here.
Yeah, and I would like to ask all the people who are present in this room to open their cameras for a last picture of the whole group. And also, Renuka, if you allow me to thank especially to Hanan, Hosanna, Alex, Edson, and yourself for the whole time, for the translators, for all the supporting people, because it has been really a landmark for us. And we really recognize the importance of your words and your work in supporting initiatives at the local level, like a country like Brazil, and the several others that are here present. So thanks a lot. And Renuka, if you want to ask a last word from everyone.
I think we covered so much. I don't think the last word is just let's do it, let's get it done, let's keep these words alive in our journey together. I think we're probably set, but from my side too, thank you. And also to say that the ACTA group and all its partners are always there to kind of hear, listen, work in collaboration and partnership. So a little shout out to that working group as well. With that, I think we're ready to turn on cameras then.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. And it was a great seminar. Your English version is going to be sent by email, but anyone can download from the CBDL website as well as the Portuguese. They are already available. All this video is going to be also available in the YouTube channel of CBDL in the 3 languages. So it's going to be possible to recover what we missed initially due to technical reasons. But thanks a lot and have a great week.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Hanan. Thank you. Bye-bye. Yeah.